So thank you everybody for coming tonight, and it's really lovely to see all of you. And I'm very grateful to NASCAD for having this idea to actually, have an event here, have an alumni event here in an exhibition that features the late Garry Kennedy's work. So, and this is the first exhibition of his work since he passed away in 2021. So it's special. And it's really special. I know Gary's smiling to know that all these NASCAD alumni are gathered here in Vancouver for this occasion. It's really great. Myself, and with something slightly more than a cameo appearance from curator Mandy Jensen, are going to present. I'm going to start here. The whole thing, the whole talking part will be about 45 minutes, a little less, I think. And if you need a stool, there are these sitting, like these things just around the corner there. And I believe there are more on the other side that can be, yes, there are. So don't feel, like you're stuck on your feet. Okay, so we decided the reason that this exhibition came about was because of the Larry Weiner poster collection and the long time promise to do an exhibition of the poster collection. Some of you may know that the poster collection was the Larry Weiner poster collection. I'm going to call him Larry, Lawrence Weiner. That collection was started in the early 80s through conversation between Garry, Gerald Ferguson, and then it became the responsibility of the Annalee Owens Gallery, which was the gallery of NASCAD that I had just started being a student assistant at in 1983. And so one of my earliest tasks at NASCAD as a staff person was to, at the mailroom, identify the posters that were coming in from Lawrence Weiner and unwrap them and put them in this purpose-built crate that we had and add them to the list and tell Vera Lamecca, who was the director, that I'd done it. And they were coming in quite regularly. Like, I gathered about 32 of them. As you know, there are now hundreds of them. And in 1990, the collection was acquired by the Vancouver Art Gallery, moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so that's also a really nice connection here in terms of this evening. When Mandy Jensen invited me to come and be an advisor on this project, what came to be the Horizons Project, one of the things that she said was she was interested in this kind of friendship relationship between Larry and Garry. And was there a way that we could kind of bring that out in the show? And I said, no problem. I've got correspondence, So I've been the sort of family archivist when Garry and I were together, and which was the last 20 years before he passed away, which was a lot of time to pull out the various postcards and correspondence that were here and there in various piles and drawers, and some were sort of mouse-eaten, and but it was all there. And so I just wanted to start with a little story about this photograph. Some of you may know it already, but I'm going to tell you. When Garry was about to retire from being the president of NASCAD in 1990, he'd been there since 1967, and you all know what NASCAD went through from 67 to 1990. And the board, in their wisdom, said, who were a mix, quite a mix of folks. So they said, Garry, we'd like to have a portrait of you. And Garry said, well, I'd consider, yeah, how are we going to do that? And probably he didn't say that. Probably he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Anyway, he said, well, what I would like is for Larry Weiner to take a photograph of me. And I'd like that to be the portrait. And so they agreed. And it was actually the student rep at the time and John Murchie, who was the librarian, who kind of saw the process through. And but it was funded by the board. So Larry agreed. Garry went down to New York, and they took a bunch of photos. Obviously, they were in good humor. And then the contact sheets came back, and they looked at them together, and Larry said, well, anybody could have taken these pictures. And so Garry said, well, just cut the corner off. And so that's why the photo is presented in this way. It's Larry's signature as suggested by Garry. And there's a little drawing here that I found in our archives that shows Garry, like it's a picture of him cutting off. He's showing how this should be cut. So I just thought it was great. I keep it on the back of this photo usually, so we brought it out for the show. And there's a funny thing here about Garry's friendship with Larry that I'm just going to read a little bit of. I think it's very telling. So this is what we used to send, a memo. We used to send memos, right, before emails. So this is a memo to John Murchie and Chris Rogers, who's the student rep. And it's about the photo portrait commission of GNK by Larry Weiner, and it's signed by Garry. And it says, I met with Larry when in New York City last week, and he took a number of photos, both in black and white and color. Well, he's pleased with the results. He plans to take a little more time to consider the options. I know he will do good work. He always does. When the topic of costs came up, as I suspected, Larry said that he would do it as a friend at no cost. I felt guilty accepting this, probably for two reasons. He has just bought a new house, which of course he has now to pay off, and also he had just returned from France from the opening of an important exhibition, the Lawrence Weiner Poster Archives of the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. This archive is so valuable to the college, both as a positive promotional tool and as a valuable monetary asset, that I felt there should be some payment to Larry for his good work. I suggested $2,000 plus out-of-pocket expenses to him, and he seemed grateful. I hope that this is acceptable to you and the board, and I thank you for your support, GNK. So I thought that was a nice kind of statement about their relationship. I also want to point out from Larry to Garry in 1984. So Larry's writing about a couple of other things, and then he says, please forgive me, but I have used your name again in an attempt to get a Guggenheim. Do keep in touch. And again, sorry about sticking you with the Guggenheim thing, but to have a friend who is an artist and pres of a prestigious institution, well, stature has its weight. Love and kisses, Lawrence. And then at the end, in red, he says, am designing the Art Metropole catalog for them. Perhaps something can transpire about a catalog of the poster archive. So this was in 1984, and in 1986, this poster archive book was published, came out from the NASCAD press. So that was a pretty good turnaround. And parenthetically, Larry gave Garry the maquette for this book, and it's in the show. If you want to see it, it's under glass. Can't see too much, but you do see one page of it, and you see that it's exactly when you compare the pages here with the pages of the maquette, it is what it is. And so anyway, that's across the way in that area where there's a few NASCAD posters on a standalone wall on the other side, and then there's this vitrine with the maquette in it. And Larry gave it to Garry for his 50th birthday. So kind of nice, huh? In 1985. So that was just as production would have been, because the book came out in 86, the idea came up in 84, and the gift was made in 85. I think that's just really nice. So over here, there are a number of postcards that Lawrence sent to Garry. I'm just going to read one of them, just to give you the flavor. So they start in 1972, and they run into 2000. So a long friendship. So the very first postcard, April 4th, 1972. Dear Garry, it is unfortunate we couldn't have a drink in New York, but most assuredly there shall be many other times. If anything comes up to do, contact me in Amsterdam. With best regards and many thanks, Lawrence Weiner. So anyway, these are the postcards that I found scattered around in our stuff that Garry, didn't exactly have organized under Larry Weiner, but they were all there, here and there. And they're also, I have to say, he sent me a note to say thanks for doing the work on collecting the posters at NASCAD. And it's one of his Ships at Sea. It says, for Cathy Busby, Ships at Sea, Amsterdam, 86. And then it's a page work, so kind of a concrete poem from Bleecker Street to NASCAD, and the Southern Polar Circus and the Northern Polar Circuit. And yeah, so I had that tucked away in a folder somewhere, and by chance found it a few years ago. I had forgotten that he'd given it to me. And, it's interesting how over the decades something can become quite significant that you kind of didn't really think that much about at the time. These are also sort of visual letters that Larry sent to Garry over the years. So I just wanted to start this talk by introducing that relationship, and I guess just kind of taking the opportunity to say how important these relationships are between our artist friends, colleagues, and yeah. So now we're going to sort of change position, and well, actually, you know what? I'm going to start, because of our camera person and how we've organized to do tonight. I'm just going to do one more thing here, which is that I'm going to read the Horizons manifesto statement, not really manifesto. So this exhibition that we're staging here was originally intended to happen in 1980 in an exhibition called Pluralities at the National Gallery of Canada. And it was rejected. And Garry was not one to, what would we say? Garry didn't have trouble standing up to authority, since he was an authority. But so I think he did some nice trailblazing along the way because he used his cultural capital to open up new pathways, I assert. And so here's what happened. So I'm just going to read this statement that is on the wall over there because I want you to hear it. The second floor of the National Gallery contains a more or less permanent collection of paintings selected from its collection. The entire floor is divided into several smaller galleries, each of which exhibits paintings from a specific historical period. As my work for the exhibition Pluralities 1980, the position of all the landscape paintings on the second floor are adjusted so that their horizon lines are on a line at my eye level. After consideration by gallery administrators, the work was not accepted because the second floor space requested was additional to the space which was allocated to this exhibition. So Garry rolled his eyes about that and then came up with another proposal. And this was already his second proposal. The first was that the involved removing the frames on all the work in the historic collection and hanging them very close together, which was also rejected, but I think a little more understandably. Anyway, so Garry came up because the space was in addition to what had been allocated for the Pluralities exhibition, and that was a no-no. So he said, okay, I'm gonna do allocations. As an alternative to the rejected proposal, my work for Pluralities, 1980, consists of all the space allocated to the exhibition, which by the time of the opening of the exhibition has not been allocated to other participants. To identify the work, should there be space left over, copies of this page from the exhibition's catalog are placed within the areas finally allocated to me. And so there were two office trays, that you would, like an in-out box, kind of from a 1980 office. And they had copies of this in English and in French on the other side. And it sat on a kind of banquet table in the space that was allocated to Garry. So it was very stark. But it was Garry, working with space and thinking about the propriety of space and who controls the space within an art institution. And I mean, it's so interesting now the way things have opened up, the way you can have, I don't know, an exhibition that includes smells and the smell kind of permeates the whole institution. So those kind of hard boundaries have softened over the decades. And I know I read this with a little bit of sarcasm, but no offense to the National Gallery. So I'm just gonna say a little bit about the color, and then if it's okay, Ken, we'll move. Okay, so the color, you will notice, is quite pronounced. It's Garry's red iron oxide color. And Garry, as you know, probably many of you, used color for its meaning more than its actual color, its actual saturation, its description. And so in this case, when Mandy said to me, well, what color are we going to paint the walls where we're doing this Horizons exhibition? What color are we going to paint? I said, well, they've got to be red iron oxide. And that's because at the time, Garry was doing a lot of work with thinking about how, just starting to bring forward on walls, not just on canvas, the sort of backgrounds to colors. So he was thinking about the sort of undercoat or primer that he had, of course, anybody who grew up in the 40s and 50s would be familiar with from cars, the body color before it got painted, or steel, the steel of ships. So he thought it was the most frequently seen paint, it was the most frequently used paint that was the least seen. And so he liked that idea of making the invisible visible, I guess you could say, in many ways. I think he probably really kind of liked the metaphor of that, but didn't really speak that. He was more of a, this is what I'm doing, blah, 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 blah. You figure out the meaning, But anyway, so that's the red iron oxide. And I think I'm gonna, we're now going to move to our second spot of two spots, which is down in the midst. We're just gonna move down into the midst of the selected paintings. Okay, so part two. So what I'm going to talk about here is about these Horizon selected works, and then Mandy's going to pick it up and talk about a few of the individual works, and I don't know what else. And then I'm going to talk about, 3 projects where I've worked with institutional art collections. I'm just going to touch on those, and I brought some swag. So, so you can kind of look and, yeah, just making a few points about those projects. So, so these horizons, so Mandy invited me to work with her and to advise the VAG on this project. And I mean, it was sort of a term of doing the project, was that, because it had never been done before, right? It was the rejected project. And anyways, I thought it was a great idea. And so what we said together was, okay, the way to select the works for this show, you know, I was just trying to channel Garry, was to look at the horizon. They had to have a good horizon line, or an interesting horizon line, something we could kind of, you know, work with. And I thought Garry would really like this, that it's not categorized, you know, by era or by any other conventional way of organizing an exhibition of paintings. It's organized by horizons. And then I decided that when Garry was close to the end of his life, he was the same height as I was. So I decided that my eye level was his eye level. I kind of like that too. So, yeah, so 62 inches was eye level, and eye level was selected for each horizon. So rather than being the middle of the painting, it's where the horizon is. And then I went around and with the prep people and you know, said, okay, sure, this, we'll call this meets this, and this, yeah, sure, this is good. And what was really interesting about doing that was kind of seeing the amount of flexibility really that there was in identifying what's the horizon. And Garry probably was wise to that, but I only discovered it in doing this. And I guess another thing I want to point out is that this idea of horizons didn't come out of nowhere. And that in the 70s, in 75, when Garry was still spending most of his time talking about, or most of his art was talking about materiality and formal issues like, you know, what is paper, what is graphite, what is gesso, where, you know, and that idea of the red iron oxide. So he did a number of works. One was drawing all the lines on canvas, on like a 60-inch canvas, drawing all the lines of the threads and it created a kind of, you know, a horizon description. But he also did drawings on paper that were just the middle of the paper, where he was like drawing horizons. And there's one of those in the little room that has the tell-all video of me telling more about these background ideas to where horizons and color choice and use of walls came from in his work. So I'll let Mandy pick it up from here.
Thanks, Cathy. So as Cathy said, the selection of works for this exhibition was quite unusual. Usually you're working with an artist or a group of artists or an exhibition theme, and that's how you're developing your list of works. In this case, the criteria was really, as Cathy said, does it have a good visible horizon line, and is it old? So it was a really kind of I would say, fun exhibition to work on. I think quite fun for our staff as well. The other thing I might say is that we don't have a lot of opportunities to show these paintings. It's a young city. The gallery's quite young. The gallery was founded in 1931. So unlike museums on the East Coast, we don't have, you know, a great strength in historical painting. And yet we do have some really nice things that have come through donations. People have lived in Vancouver. So it's a really great opportunity for us to show some of these paintings that don't get to see the light of day very often. I think audiences have been really enjoying them. I would say a lot of the paintings in this room, with the exception of some of the works by Canadian modernists, maybe have either been shown once or twice or never. So yeah, it was a good fit for us. The Horizons framework was a really good fit for us to show some of these things that we don't show too often. And so yeah, we started out trying to really concentrate on historical artworks as much as possible, but then as you can see, we had to mix in some more modern paintings. So the paintings range from Dutch paintings from the 1600s, French Impressionist paintings, paintings by Canadian artists working in the early 1900s through to Canadian modernists. My team, maybe the things on the end wall is one of the groupings that we kind of arrived at quite early in our exhibition planning. There's a couple events going on in the gallery tonight, I think. So those are all Vancouver artists, or at least they lived in Vancouver at the time that those paintings were made. So a painting by an artist named Purple Fisher from the 1940s, kind of influenced by social realism. In the middle is a painting by Gordon Smith. It's kind of abstract painting of a logjam. And then on the right is a painting by Bruno Bobak called Vancouver Harbor. So it's kind of abstracted view of the tankers and the North Shore Mountains. So stylistically quite different, things that in other contexts you and me wouldn't show together, but we really liked how this grouping kind of worked for this show. We were also quite happy with what happened on this wall, where things get a little more eclectic, I would say. You have some really kind of unlikely neighbors. So there's a painting from the Founders collection. When the gallery was founded, some citizens from Vancouver basically went on a shopping spree and bought paintings to have in this new gallery. So some of the paintings in this room are from our Founders collection. So there's a painting by a Scottish artist next to a painting by Tacton Abbey, a local artist, but that's a series that's from the prairies, about the prairies. Beside a painting by Quebecois artist Jacques-François Lemieux, and then an English artist, Jose Rice. So really, like I said, I think this is the only context in which you achieve those things side by side, but we were quite pleased with how Garry's idea became a little more pronounced in that run of things with the kind of rise and fall paintings. And Cathy had great fun choosing horizon lines.
Thanks, Mandy. So now I'm just going to touch on 3 different projects that I've done that I've worked with institutional collections. Okay. So I guess the first point I wanted to make is that this is an exhibition about face that took place at Union Theological Seminary in 2012, and I was invited by A.A. Bronson, who got a Warhol grant to bring different artists to do interesting things there within what was called the Institute of Art, Politics, and Social Justice. And so it was their 175th anniversary at Union. And he said, could you do something for the occasion? And I said, yeah, I'll take down all the portraits. And so because I'd did a site visit, there were all these portraits around the place, some hung up, some in back rooms, like hidden away. And nobody knew who they were. And a lot of people were really angry about them, like that they were these dead white guys and we don't know who they are. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to take them all down. And what I did was I left silhouettes in their place. And little plug for my website anyway. So if you want to see a picture, I had to have the book finished before I could take installation pictures. So, but if you want to see them, go to cathybusby.ca and look up About Face. You just check if you want. Anyway. So it was a way of kind of working with these portraits, not for their aesthetic value, but rather selections that were made according to availability, just like selections here were made according to their horizon lines. If they were there, it became part of the collection in the case of this project in New York. and all the paintings were treated on the same level. There was no value assessments. And it was so wonderful that the seminary let me use very damaged portraits as part of my archive. I thought that was really great because it showed their life as objects within this institution. And I hired somebody to do research, as I had to do the whole project in 4 months. I hired somebody to do research to get as much information as they could about the sitters and about the artists, and then created this book, which was available for all the donors who came to a fancy event where usually the portraits circled the room. And instead there were these silhouettes, just beige silhouettes, like average color of the portraits, and a copy of the book at their place. It was a luncheon, so a copy of their book like on their plate. So yeah, and just the idea, just I guess underlining that idea of how to have this kind of criteria for selection. It means that there's it creates a different kind of grouping or collection. You can't preconceive exactly what you're going to get, like you can if you say, I'm doing a show of Gordon Smith, you know what you're gonna have. When you're doing a show of horizon lines, you don't exactly know what you're gonna get until you really start digging and see what there is. Similarly with those portraits. So I had a little bit of confidence in sort of saying, yep, Mandy, I think this is what we should do because I'd done it before and it had worked. So then the other project, I need a helper again. So in this case, this acquired in 1964, I wanted to point out the idea of the value of the colors, like thinking about how important it was to use the red iron oxide. And I really think Garry did groundbreaking work in that way in his time, in the late 70s and into the 80s. But the way that I used it with acquired in 1964 at Confederation Center for the Arts it was invited by Pan Wendt to do something there for their 40th or 50th anniversary. And so the green color of the cover is actually, you'll see, not a flat green. It's actually a photograph that's been reproduced to replicate the backing that was used, that was extremely acid. It was like very high in acid. So basically this kind of backing that was used on all the paintings was deteriorating the paintings at a more rapid rate than necessary. And so eventually it was all taken off, but it was the thing in the 1960s. So I really liked bringing forward that idea of changing how our knowledge, as in medicine and science and everything, changes over time in art. And so the same thing, the green, I wanted to highlight that green, and then the pink. If you open to about the second page of the catalog, you'll see that there's an image of a BC Binning mobile, and the photograph of it is very much pinked. It's deteriorated over time. And so instead of suggesting that it be restored or that we not use it, I said, oh, I really like this photo because it really shows the passage of time and the deterioration of the art, the deterioration over time. So, yeah. And so key colors, discoloration, and yeah, so that idea, just tying back in with that Garry did this show in 1980, and now our view of exhibitions and of installation and of color on the walls has changed so much. And also, I used correspondence to elaborate the process of acquisition. I think we're a little short of time, so I won't read it, but if you're curious about correspondence and sort of behind the scenes stories, like we show with having this correspondence with Larry, That's what we were doing. That's what I was doing with digging into the 1964 archives and finding, for instance, there's a woman, Hilda Woolnow, she calls herself H.M. Woolnow until her whole relationship with the gallery around an acquisition is finished, because she was being treated, she had experience of being treated really badly as a woman artist. So there's a letter where finally she says, by the way, I am a woman, Hilda Woolnow, at the end of the letter, after she gets her crates back and she gets paid. So I thought that was really interesting. And so just the way that, I think correspondence can work in a really interesting way alongside the presentation of artwork. And again, I used the absence in this exhibition too. So the silhouettes that you see that aren't the actual artwork are a presence of the artwork in its absence, which is what I've done with About Face. So all the works that were acquired in 1964 were represented in the exhibition, even if they had been deaccessioned or were in conservation, weren't suitable for being shown. So it just kind of showed that the changing of a collection over time. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming and for being attentive. And that's the end of my talk.